I'm here with Rob Allen again. Rob, good morning.
Morning, everyone.
Good afternoon if you're over in Europe, and good early morning if you're in California, and very early morning if you're in Hawaii. So we wanted to put this webinar together based on a white paper that we're about to release in 2 weeks' time, I believe, that talks about compliance from a different point of view. Because when we think about compliance, often we're thinking about what lawyers think compliance is, because most frameworks are written by lawyers. But we as IT people don't understand legal talk. What we understand is what technical solution do I need to put in place? And there's a lot of different frameworks and they all have different requirements. And most of those frameworks are really, really ambiguous in what they say. So what we've tried to do, or what we have done, is we've created it the other way around. We've created a webinar series and a white paper that tells you all of the things you should be doing in your IT world and which compliance frameworks require that. So rather than giving very ambiguous text, we're saying, hey, you should be using allow listing, and this is what requires it. You should be using an antivirus, and this is what requires it. You should be taking away admin rights, and this is what requires it. Because as IT people, we often understand technical requirements. We don't necessarily understand a very big set of words that talks about privileged access and least privilege and in no context whatsoever. So what we've done, I'm going to share my screen, and me and Rob are literally going to talk through, as technical people, what this means and what you can be doing as IT people and which compliance frameworks they apply to. And it's going to take us 2 weeks to do this webinar because it's still compliance, which means it's still boring, unfortunately.
On the subject of which, Danny, I just in preparation for the webinar, I did engage my friend ChatGPT to give me a joke about compliance. Now, it did initially look as if I'd broken ChatGPT because it basically just gave me a dot and refused to say anything. But about 5 minutes later, it woke up and it told me, sure, here's a compliance-related joke for you. Why did the employee refuse to play cards with the compliance officer? Because they were worried about revealing their handbook.
Ah, that's a pretty bad joke.
But that's exactly what I said. I said, that's terrible. Can I have another one, please? So it said, why did the compliance officer bring a ladder to work?
Go on.
I heard the company had a lot of high standards to meet. And I just gave up at that stage. They're all terrible. They're all terrible.
So, maybe that's a free Zero Trust World ticket for someone to come up with a better compliance.
Good compliance joke. Yes. Excellent. Right.
By the end of the webinar. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share a PowerPoint slide because we know we love PowerPoint slides. And this is just going to allow us to go through the steps. We're going to get about halfway through this deck before the end of today. And for those who do register and attend the second really long, boring webinar, we will send you the white paper. So I'm going to share my screen here. I'm not going to read through the contents. What I am going to do is just quickly go over some of the frameworks and the highlighted frameworks that we're looking at. There are lots of different cybersecurity frameworks, and all of them have different standards and requirements. However, they all have the same objective, which is to make you more secure, or in many cases, to fine you more money when you're not secure or something bad happens. And when we think about a lot of compliance, that's really the point of it. If you are required to be compliant as opposed to want to be compliant for business reasons, then there's normally a fine at the other end. And every year there's a new set of compliance, or every few years there's a new set of compliance, and every year there's a bigger fine at the other end of it. So, yes. So NIST 800-171 and NIST Cybersecurity Framework, they are created by NIST. It gives you a set of standard controls, and NIST is really commonly used in the US. If you are doing any business with the federal government, whether you are required to be CMMC or other standards, basically following NIST is your best friend. The 800-171 is the more complete. The cybersecurity framework, I feel, is a far more easier set of compliance to handle. CIS is my favorite. So CIS is a set of standard safeguards designed to mitigate and observe cyber attacks. The most current version is version 8, apparently, and it's designed to keep up with today's latest threats. Now, what's nice about CIS in my mind is it aligns more closely to technical controls than any of the others. So rather than, it actually does call out things like you should use whitelisting, you should use EDR, as opposed to NIST, especially 800-171, likes to use very ambiguous terms like you should implement application allow listing and block listing as part of your cybersecurity strategy, but doesn't tell you where you need to use it, leaving it up to you to make the decision where you need to use it. But if you're wrong, it doesn't help you. I suppose one of my favorite simple compliances, and what the Australians realize, is if we give 200 or 110 controls to people to do, to implement from a compliance point of view, or I say compliance, it's not really, it's kind of compliance, people will not do it. So they created something called the Essential 8. They said, what are the 8 most important things for people to do in their cybersecurity? Because if we tell all businesses to do 110, no businesses will do 110. What will happen is everyone will do nothing, or 99% of people will do nothing. So Australia took a different approach where they pushed quite heavily the Essential 8 maturity level for all Australian government or all Australian companies to follow. Now, it is not a penalty if you don't follow it. However, there was a company sued by the equivalent of the Australian SEC last year for failing to meet the Essential 8, which they weren't required to do, but not failing to meet it, but failing to disclose to investors that they don't meet basic cybersecurity requirements. And we're seeing a lot more of that, companies being sued civilly or criminally by government agencies such as the SEC or regulatory bodies, because they're not meeting cybersecurity requirements and they're not disclosing it to their customers. So think about this. If you have a customer and you don't do the basic cybersecurity requirements, which is disclosed nowhere, and then you get breached, then you have now broken your fiduciary duties, your obligations, your moral duties to tell your customer that you weren't doing these things. If you tell your customer, I don't care about security and I'm a cat mechanic, then that's probably okay. But if you are taking people's data, if you're a car dealership, if you're a MSP, then you should be doing the minimum things. And if not, then don't be surprised when customers come after you for that. Cyber Essentials is a UK standard, essentially very similar to the Australian standard, only a little bit more complicated. They figured that in England, they can handle more data and digest more data. They were wrong, by the way, because in Australia, I would say somewhere between 70 to 80% of companies follow the Essential 8, whereas in the UK, it's probably more like 10 to 15%. So 8 items versus 30 items, you're always going to win when you ask someone to do 8 things.
It's also a self-assessment. Certainly the basic Cyber Essentials is a self-assessment.
Oh, well, and I believe the Essential 8 is 2. It's just got less to self-assess. Now you can get Cyber Essentials certified, I believe, or Plus, which gives you a nice little stamp to put on your website. And HIPAA is the most ambiguous, well, it's actually high trust is the correct term for technology, but HIPAA is the regulation that requires healthcare to keep your data safe. And I'm paraphrasing here, high trust, which is the controls you should implement. It is essentially a way for the federal government to fine you lots of money. And if you don't do certain things and if you get breached. And it expands, HIPAA itself expands far past technology. It's more about, am I allowed to give someone's brother their medical records, or can I go in and find out Rob's medical history? And the answer is, should be no.
You don't have one.
Okay, so let's get into the meat and potatoes of this, which is what should we be doing? So let's talk about access controls, which has some kind of requirement in all of the frameworks we've discussed. And what is access controls? First of all, what does that relate to in technology? First of all, implementing something to manage your user accounts. Now, I think 10 years ago, that was always Active Directory. So have Active Directory implemented. If it's not Active Directory, use some kind of AIM solution. It can be a third-party AIM solution, or it can be Azure Active Directory, or something very simple to that. But have a system to implement users and logins and passwords.
Just authentication, something that implements authentication.
Now, depending on which framework you're following, depending on which standards you want to comply with, depends on what you need to do in that system. But we've put a list of things on the left, and on the right here, it will tell you which ones are required, but a list of things on the left that you should have in your access control system. And one of them should be an inventory of all user accounts. So whether you've got 5 employees or whether you've got 5,000 employees or 500,000 employees, you should be able to pull a list of all user accounts in your system and group them appropriately if required. Because if you've got 500,000, you probably don't know everyone's name on that list. And if you're anything like ThreatLocker, I think we've got 2 people that have very similar names now, and so it gets really confusing. Every user should have a unique login. Now, this seems obvious, but shared logins are not permitted in most cybersecurity recommendations or compliances or standards. So if you share a computer with someone, you should log in with a different user. So if you are a hospital and you've got a cart with a computer on that can access all patient records, each user should have to lock it, log out, and log back in when they come back to that. So each user should have their own login ID. Some companies use numbers, other companies use names. Mostly it's better to use names because you know who's logged in then. And it's very, very simple. Again, if you're using Active Directory, every user has to have a unique login. The same with Azure and probably most AIM systems. The monitoring of logins. Now, there are some group policies we could talk about here as well. So all logins should be logged. So if you're using Active Directory, there is a group policy for that. I think I had it up on another screen.
While you're looking for that, I'm going to give people another compliance joke. Why did the compliance officer go to therapy? Because they couldn't let go of their need for control in every situation.
Did this one come from someone on the chat, or does this one come from you again?
Sorry, it's another ChatGPT one, and I just give up at this stage. They're all terrible.
Oh, there we go. It's under computer configuration. If you open Group Policy Editor on your domain controller, go to Computer Configuration, Policies, Windows Settings, Security Settings, and Advanced Audit Policy Configuration. Inside there, it is
Audit policies.
Audit policies. You've got audit log on, define success and failure, audit log off, define success and failure, and audit log on and log off events, define success and failure. You can turn that on, and then suddenly everything gets logged in your event log. That is all that's required to do that. You don't have to go and buy a third-party system. If you do have lots of different Active Directories, you may look at having centralized event logging, centralized auditing. There's other options as well, but you can simply just enable Active Directory policy. Automatic account lockout after a certain number of failed login attempts. Now, what should be the failed number, Rob? What's your opinion on this?
Oh, that's a good question. I like 10 as a number.
I don't think 10's a bad number either. So typically the old school way is we're going to put 3 attempts, and then every
that's not going to work. You get up with a sleepy head in the morning and you try and put in your password wrong a couple of times.
Yes, or just have a regular user that can't put a password in, especially when it has to be more than 4 characters. You get lots of mistakes.
I think 10 is a good number.
Yeah, if you're putting your password in wrong 10 times, there's probably a reason. Now, there is something worth considering. Automatic lockout attempts on public-facing servers can be very dangerous because it does allow people to DDoS your accounts and lock them out. So you have to think about, what am I putting public, and do I need a logout attempt, or should I be using dual factor as an alternative on those public-facing servers? But definitely, if you're thinking about Active Directory, if you're thinking about regular PC logins, 10 attempts is a good amount. You're not going to guess many passwords in 10 tries. And then automatic re-account activation after a period of time is very useful as well. So lock for 15 minutes. You don't want to have to unlock everyone's computer. So if you use that, very, very important. Use a screensaver. Now, this is written in a very compliance way, but it kind of goes without saying. A screensaver that hides the content of the screen to prevent unauthorized viewing, as opposed to a screensaver that just moves your monitor. If you remember back in ~95, Rob.
Yeah, I hate to say it, but I do, Danny, yes.
Yeah, remember the bubble?
To save your screen.
Yeah, the bubble. And it would take a picture of your screen before the screensaver went on, and then the bubble would move around and you could see all your data. Not an acceptable screensaver.
No.
So use a screensaver not to save your screen, because your screen's not going to burn out now, but to lock your account. Now, this is where it gets really, really complicated. Provide role-based access, because this requires you to do a little bit of work on who is the roles. Now, if you've got 5 employees, there's probably 2 or 3 roles at most. In that's an admin role, as in I'm an IT person and I have admin, or I have an admin-based account. You have a finance role maybe, and then you have general roles in your companies. But as you get bigger, you're going to need more roles. There's nothing wrong with having 2 or 3 roles in your company. You don't have to have 500 roles. And literally just defining it and putting on a piece of paper saying, this is the roles we have, this is what it grants you access to, is absolutely fine as well. and you can use that with groups. If you're using Active Directory, if you're using Azure Active Directory, you can use Azure-based groups, and that will help you with providing roles-based access. So you can create a group of admins, you can create a group of finance people, of IT people, of end users, and you can create those groups in Active Directory. You don't have to do anything too fancy. And you can even use the description field in the group to define the role more clearly, so people know if I put someone in this group, they are a salesperson, then they will have access to all of the sales files. Again, you don't need a big complicated system for that. Some of the other things incorporate least privilege, least access needed to perform duties. Now, here's the problem when you think about access controls. What are you gaining access to? Because what we're talking about here is Active Directory. And Active Directory is really an authentication system. And you can use that authentication system for file servers. You can use that authentication system for choosing what programs can run in your environment. You can use it for lots of other things. But when you're, and this falls outside of Active Directory's remit, but the general consensus is whatever the identity is, which is provided by Active Directory, only give access where needed, whether it's to a program, whether it's to domain admin accounts, whether it's to files, just always give least access. And disable unused user accounts. This is really, really important. The amount of cyber attacks I've seen where somebody had an account they forgot existed, the person left a long time ago, the password hadn't been recycled, it was on the web, and someone managed to get into it. So there is a PowerShell script you can run, and we can share one with you, but you can probably get it from ChatGPT, that will tell you all of the unused Active Directory accounts in your environment, and you can disable them. Now, disabling accounts versus deleting accounts. What's your thoughts, Rob?
Oh, delete with extreme prejudice.
So, and I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer here. The advantage of disabling versus deleting is when you delete accounts in Active Directory, every reference to that account now becomes a GUID. So when you go and look through your event logs and it says GUID S-11 or not GUID, sorry, an SID, it doesn't mean anything. So there is advantages to disabling versus deleting, but it doesn't mean someone can re-enable that account by mistake. Okay, and the final thing in here, protect feedback of authentication.
I'm assuming what it means is if I'm trying to log into an account as rob@blah.com, you don't want it to give feedback to say, oh, that's not rob@blah.com's email address, that account doesn't exist, rather than saying, oh, that's the wrong password for that user. I think
it's a little bit ambiguous.
Yeah, it is a NIST recommendation. Obscure feedback of authentication information during the authentication process to protect the information from possible exploitation and use by unauthorized individuals.
Okay, so we'll touch a little bit on some of the compliance. So NIST 800-171 being the beast here. It says prevent the reuse of identifiers for a period of time. What does that mean? It means don't use this. If you have a username of Danny and Danny leaves the company and a new Danny starts, do not give him the same name as Danny. That's pretty much what it means.
How many Dannys do we have now, Danny?
I don't know. I was in a meeting last week and there was 4 Dannys in the room.
4 Danny.
It was very easy to remember everybody's name.
Entirely too many Dannys as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, and we only have 2 Robs.
We've got more than 2 Robs.
Oh, I don't know. I only know 2 Robs. I won't disclose who the other one is because then someone else will get upset that I didn't know them.
That wouldn't be very compliancy of you, Danny.
Okay. Temp password login. So give someone a temp password and require it have immediate change. Temporary passwords should be unique. However, NIST does not require those temporary passwords to be unique in their authorization. But we should have temporary passwords given to people and they should change them as soon as they log in. And it should have automatic termination. Now, the way this is worded in NIST, basically it means auto log off. It's automatic termination of user sessions after conditions are met. In other words, if there's inactivity, log the user off. And it's a good thing, very easy thing to do in Active Directory. And you can even do it in Azure AD. And if you're using Azure AD, you can also use Configuration Manager or Active Directory to help with that. How can ThreatLocker help you with this? This is not our core product. However, we do have a configuration manager, which allows you to set limits and failed logins, passwords right out of the box. If you are an MSP or you're an IT manager that has a decentralized server and you don't want to use Active Directory to control that, you can set global policies for minimum password lengths using ThreatLocker configuration manager. You can set lockout on failed logins, and you can do other cool stuff like that. You can even log user activity as well, and record logins using a configuration manager. ThreatLocker elevation control will allow you to take domain admin permissions away from users that do not need it, or local admin permissions, and it will allow you to run certain programs as an admin rather than giving the user full admin access to their machine. So we can help you with that. It's really, really easy. I had a customer that was trying to deploy another PAM solution. They'd actually purchased it on a 3-year license 2 years ago. 2 years into the deployment, they still couldn't elevate the software they needed. We got on a call with them, did a demo, and within 5 minutes after the demo, they said, how hard is that to set up? We said, we can do it right now. And we actually deployed the agent and had it running within 5 minutes for them. It's very, very easy to elevate software in ThreatLocker. You just deploy and you check the box. And we can also log all user activity. So multi-factor authentication. Rob, do you want to walk through what you should be doing here?
So you should implement multi-factor authentication to protect privilege accounts, remote access, most definitely. So if you're running a, well, obviously you shouldn't have RDP. If you're running RDP on the internet, you're insane. But even any sort of account accessible for the internet basically should have multi-factor authentication on it. Unfortunately, not something that we can help with, but as you can see, it is something that is recommended as part of NIST, CIS, Australia, CELA, Cyber Essentials. Nothing in HIPAA about that, but it is pretty essential that you have multi-factor on anything that is accessible from the internet.
So the privileged accounts don't just mean administrator accounts, although in most cases tie towards administrator accounts. If someone is an administrator, you should have multi-factor on that account. There are various tools you can install on your server that are free of charge to install. There's a lot of vendors. I won't go into individual ones that will give you dual factor for RDP for 5 users free of charge. But there are a few options there. But if you've got RDP, even on your LAN open, you've got domain admin accounts, having multi-factor is really important there. Remote access, course VPN, Citrix servers, RDP through a gateway, please, not directly published on the internet, and anything that's accessible from the internet, which mostly means, and the most painful thing to do here means Office 365. Like it's painful. I agree, it's painful, but make sure your users or your customers are using multi-factor on Office 365, because when they get phished, it's what's going to stop someone logging into their account and a cyber attack getting much, much worse. And ThreatLocker has no way of helping you in anything here other than telling you what's happening on your environment. Okay, so we should have privileged activity should be centrally logged. Frankly, in my mind, all activity should be centrally logged. So get a SIEM, get a central event logging, and if somebody is elevating or doing something, log it centrally as much as you can, especially if you've got 40 domain controllers, because there is nothing worse than going through 40 domain controllers. I did ransomware recoveries and I did ransomware investigations. And when you have to go through every single server to look at all of the logs, it takes a lot longer. So if you can centrally log, that's really useful. Your log files should be protected. Technically, under most of these standards, the log files are protected. They're not protected. The Windows event log can be cleared by anyone. And when it is cleared, it wipes it away and you cannot get it back. However, it does say that it's been wiped. So most standards will accept that as a protected log file. I don't really. I think you should log it to an external server that is separate from someone on the server. So if the domain admin logs in and does a bunch of bad stuff and then says, I'm going to clear the log file, you can see that they cleared the log file, but it would be better if they couldn't clear it. It was on a separate server. So again, exporting it is really useful. Privileged environments being separate from non-privileged environments.
That means that things that I suppose are more important are separated and inaccessible. I mean, the second one down below is pretty much linked to it, which is privileged accounts can't access non-privileged environments.
But I think that's where it's talking about is if you're logged in as an admin, you shouldn't be able to access the web and the internet. And
That is one of the essential 8 recommendations. I actually worked with a couple of customers in Australia to implement that. So they literally didn't want administrators to be able to access the internet or email or the web in general. That is one of the essential 8 recommendations.
So actually, the amount of cyber attacks you can stop by stopping internet access is unbelievable. The amount of vulnerabilities. When you think about the Exchange vulnerability, the SolarWinds Orion vulnerability, even most of the Office vulnerabilities, by not being able to access the internet, more often than not, they can't exfil data and they can't get instructions. Because if the machine can't get out to the internet, it can't do that. So we make a policy of blocking all internet access from all of our servers unless there's an explicit need, and then we allow it by that site only. But also from programs, from users. If you can take a user's access away from the internet, the amount of damage they can do is massive. And it's important to take that away from your admin. So they have to do that extra step. They can't just be browsing on your server and download, hey, I want to download this and run it on my environment. They have to think a little bit more about it. Privileged accounts are disabled after 45 days of inactivity. So we gave a script with 180 days. But if the account isn't used for 45 days, we should disable it. It's not a bad idea. Again, if you're using Active Directory, you just go in and disable the account. If you're using external systems, just go in and disable the account. If they're not being used, remove them. Last login time is really, really important.
I'd be really interested as to how much, I mean, if somebody runs that script, for example, I'd be really interested as to what portion of the unused or disableable accounts are actually privileged accounts. I'm aware of at least one ransomware attack that took place using a mistakenly configured privileged account, if I could put it that way. So it was a privileged account that was set up as it was an account that was set up as a privileged account that didn't need to be set up as a privileged account. And it was the one that was brute forced and basically gave them full domain access. Hasten to add, not a ThreatLocker customer, one from my very, very distant past. But yeah, it's really important that you know which privileged accounts are required and get rid of anything else.
So the next one, and just from where ThreatLocker can help you on these things, elevation control allows you to only allow certain programs to elevate, certain functions to elevate, and you can also log all elevation. So if somebody does elevate a program, you see that in the ThreatLocker Unified Audit centrally in one place. And if you do access any files, you do go out to the internet there, you're going to be able to see that, and you can even block it for certain applications, for certain elevated applications using ThreatLocker. So you can say if it's this elevated, don't allow this to go into the internet using ring fencing. Enable Windows Defender Credential Guard and Windows Defender Remote Credential Guard. Okay, provide privacy and security notice on login. This is such a stupid requirement. It's on all of our machines, and we can help you with it, by the way. We can set a message using Configuration Manager that says you're not allowed to access this system. And I know why it is, because ThreatLocker or compliance is often written by lawyers. And, you know, we have signs outside our office. When you get off the elevators, when you go up the stairways, there's a sign and it says trespassers will be prosecuted, and it has a legal statute underneath it. And the reason we need that sign is because someone tried to get into our office one evening and apparently they didn't break the law. So, because it wasn't clear that they'd broken the law. So we couldn't bring any charge. Now, look, we didn't catch them. There was a warrant out for their arrest. All they did was steal a gumball from our lobby, from the gumball machine, and they put a warrant out for their arrest for stealing a gumball because that was the only thing they had. they had them on because they technically didn't trespass because it wasn't clearly posted in our building that entering the building, it was locked, so the doors were locked. They didn't break any of the doors. They couldn't get onto the floor, but they came into our lobby. They stole a gumball, or they took a gumball. I think stole is a strong word, but essentially the sheriff's office came out and said, well, here's our problem. We find them. We can charge them with theft of a gumball. And that's pretty much all we can charge them with, because by coming into
a sign to say you shouldn't be here.
We didn't have a sign to say you shouldn't be here. So this is why this is a requirement. It's not going to help you from a security point of view. However, putting a sign in front of your computers makes it easier for prosecutors to charge someone who accesses your system illegally. It's not going to help you when some Russians are breaking into your system, because criminals just don't care. But it may help you if an employee does something and goes onto a system they shouldn't have access to. So it's not a bad idea. It takes 2 minutes. You can do it in Active Directory, and you can do it in ThreatLocker Configuration Manager. You put a message saying that unauthorized access to the system is prohibited, and we're gonna sue you to the maximum extent. Lots of bad, scary words, and that will stop someone hacking your system, I promise. Okay, we moved past access control.
Your favorite subject, Danny. Antiviruses.
And anti-malware. And by the way, antivirus, anti-malware, and if you read the wording of this, it's very, very ambiguous. So it doesn't say you must have an antivirus. It doesn't say you must have an EDR. What they tend to say, and I'm not going to read each one out, but I think of 800 to 171, you must have a system implemented to detect or prevent the execution of malicious software in your environment. So that's pretty much the requirement. All of these standards have some kind of all of these compliance requirements have some kind of standard around it. But here's the thing. So first of all, they should scan things in real time. So anything you're using shouldn't allow something to run and then try and break it afterwards. It should scan it, make sure it's not bad beforehand, or make sure it's not good if you're using ThreatLocker, because we obviously allow the good only. And it should block it in real time as opposed to after the fact. It should have some method of scanning web pages or anything you download from web pages. And different standards are slightly different, but ideally you want something that's scanning the web pages or anything that comes from the web pages. And it should prevent connection with malicious websites. Now, this is interesting. Malicious websites is very, very difficult to define, because in order for a website to be known as malicious, it has to do something malicious and bad. But there are a number of free DNS services out there: Ultra DNS, Google DNS. I think OpenDNS have one that will literally, if you use their DNS as your recursive DNS, will literally block any known malicious websites. Now, I'm not saying it's the best at blocking it, but if it meets a requirement and it doesn't cost you anything, and you're just using Google's DNS, it's very, very simple. They'll block known phishing sites. They'll block known malicious sites, which is about 0.1% of the known site of malicious sites on the internet. However, it does meet the requirement, and it will block known malicious sites for you. Scans removable media. So you should have something that ensures USB drives or CD-ROMs are actually scanned or processed in a way before they're allowed to be opened. They should have automatic updates to their definitions, and you should continuously test your antivirus to see if you can improve it. Now, all of these have slightly different standards along them. Don't expect that a traditional AV or even traditional EDR is going to block every piece of malware in your environment, but do put something in there. What can ThreatLocker do to help you with this? Of course, we block all software, not just malware, that isn't allowed. We also control what applications can do. So our approach, rather than saying, hey, I saw PowerShell do something suspicious, we're just going to ring fence it and say, I saw some PowerShell do something outside of the norm, and we just didn't let it. ThreatLocker Ops can help and detect and respond to IOC. So most of these standards are outdated, and they're looking for malicious code as opposed to malicious behaviors. The compliance frameworks haven't really updated. What you should be doing in addition to that is looking for malicious behaviors. So did this application access more data than it needed to? Did this application reach out to a suspicious site on the website? Did this application create a domain admin account? These are suspicious behaviors, otherwise known as an indicator of compromise, and ThreatLocker can help you and detect and respond to those. And we can also restrict various tools such as macros and admin tools using ThreatLocker Configuration Manager. So we can help you a lot in this area, but most importantly, from the website stuff, even use free DNS, real-time scanning, so don't block it after the fact, and just have a decent EPP in place. Rob, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I was just going to say, we've got a couple of questions come through to the question and answer we might want to answer. Now, I know you're having tremendous fun, but we are almost out of time. Mark Fretwell has asked, is the ThreatLocker audit effectively a SIEM?
The answer is no, unless you only run endpoints and servers. So effectively, to be a SIEM, you need to collect data from all or the majority of relevant devices. So if you are a remote company that has laptops and desktops and you don't have managed firewalls because you're now a modern company, then ThreatLocker meets the requirements of a SIEM. But if you have firewalls and you need to get data from those firewalls, then the answer is no, because with ThreatLocker Audit, with the Windows event logs being passed in now with the ThreatLocker Ops, with the every execution, every elevation, all of those other things being passed in, it meets all of the requirements for a SIEM, except it's not taking data from your firewall. So if you do need to collect data from your firewall, then it will not meet the requirements. If you don't, it will meet the requirements.
And Sigmund Labart has asked, or has made a correct assessment, that is, a user should not have user and admin permission in the same account.
That is correct. And I think when the access control was talking about separate environments, I think that's kind of what it's saying as well, in that you should never be an admin and a user in the same account. Because if you are, well, you're going to do user things like not going out to the internet, browsing the web. You should not be an admin. So that is absolutely correct. I'm going to run one more section and then we'll finish out in this session. Then we'll come back with our next scheduled webinar,
okay,
which is our application control selection, because this is probably one of the most important. And when 5 years ago, less and less of these standards had this, and now all of them do. Application control is probably one of the most important things you can be doing. And I know I've been beating that drum for a long time. What should you be doing with your application control? You should have an application control that blocks all software that isn't explicitly allowed and only allow what you need. It should keep an up-to-date software inventory of everything you have in your environment. The software needs to be monitored and the integrity maintained. So it's not okay to just list the name of file names. You need to list them and maintain integrity of that list to make sure that the hashes, their certificates and things like that. Everything should be logged. All executions on your endpoint should be logged. Whether it's Chrome extensions, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's DLL files or executables, they should be logged. Unused and unauthorized software or unsupported software should be removed from the operating system, including operating systems themselves or components of operating systems. So you should block parts of the Windows operating system that you do not need in your environment. And that is, outside of a compliance point of view, that is really, really important to stop cyber attacks, because there's so many tools in Windows that can just eat your lunch by themselves. Application containment, whether you separately contain it in another environment or you ring fence it so it's contained to control exactly what it can do. Difference between full containment and ring fencing. Ring fencing can fully contain your application, but containment cannot partially contain your application. So for example, you might say that Excel needs to talk to Word, but it doesn't need to talk to PowerShell. Unless they're contained in the same environment, Excel won't be able to talk to Word. If you have a fully contained application, it won't be able to see your data, won't be able to see your documents, but therefore you won't be able to open your documents. With the ring fencing, you can put far more refined controls around containment. You should control mobile code as well, and software libraries and scripts. ThreatLocker will help you here more than any other area of this compliance. We will help you with allow listing. We make allow listing easier than anyone else does. We will help you put boundaries around your software with the ring fencing, and we will help you log all executions. It's what ThreatLocker does really, really well. If you're not using some kind of application control now, it's the most important thing you should do. And we will come back to the next slides during our next webinar. So for those who do not know, in February every year, we host a cybersecurity conference here in Orlando, Florida. Now, if you are in Orlando or you are in Florida right now, you understand being in Orlando in July when there's a hurricane barreling towards you is not the most fun time to be here. Rob, who just moved here a few weeks ago, he's sweating and he's
panicking. Everybody is being so cool about things, and there's two hurricanes. There's one over that way and there's one over that way.
Yes, but it's not the time to visit Orlando. But however, February is the perfect time to visit Orlando. It's mid-70s for those who are across the pond, mid-20s, really nice temperatures, or those who are up in Canada, really nice temperatures, great time to be here in Orlando. Now, it's even better because what we do is we host Zero Trust World, which is a 3-day cybersecurity conference in Orlando. We have some of the coolest speakers come in. We do the coolest labs. So unlike most cybersecurity conferences, which are going to be boring and talk a lot about theory, which we're going to do some of that as well, we actually have labs with hundreds of laptops, and we get to teach you how to program with rubber duckies, how to hack computers using Metasploit, how to write malware effectively, and how to hack Wi-Fi's with pineapples, or at least we will try. and do that. It's very hands-on, very technical. We do have business sessions as well. You do get CPE credits if you do attend. It's normally $495 for a pass. We do have a discount code where you get $200 off right now if you book from this webinar. Okay, I know this is not the most exciting topic, but we will continue. We'll go through everything you should be doing, and then we'll send the white paper out afterwards. I appreciate everyone joining us today. Thank you very much.